this will be regarding Blender, and we're going to take a look at the post-processing workflow in order to improve 3D scans. So this will be the case study. As you can see over here, this will be 4.5 meter monument of Napoleon, and we're going to see that if I will zoom out, the model will look quite impressive, but if I'm going to zoom in, we're going to see that actually the model has a little bit of low detail over here. For example, over here we see on the face, we have on the nose, over there some noise, over here on the ear, and over here as well. Now, this has been scanned using Artec EVA. This is now a legacy 3D scanner. We see the scanning time 2 days and the processing time 10 days. This model is available under the Creative Commons license, and I will leave a link in the video description. I have downloaded the OBJ file, so you don't need to register. You can just click on download and that will start the download. We see the model loading now over here, as you can see. I will also extract this from the archive so that you see that I'm using directly the file available on the website. So under Napoleon OBJ2, we see that 3D scan has been processed in 2015, so almost 10 years. Now let's jump within Blender. I'm using Blender 4.3.0, and we're going to see how we can transition between the shading, the sculpting, the texture painting, and for more advanced workflow we can also go within UV editing. Now the first thing that we have to do is load our model, so I will go to File, Import. Since this has been downloaded as an OBJ, I will use the following file format. So within Downloads, we see Napoleon OBJ2. And I will select the OBJ. We see that this will be a large file, so 636 megabytes. We have the scaling over here. This is set to 1. Keep in mind that if you're going to load it like this, if I will hit import, since Blender is using meters as a default unit, and the 3D scanning uses millimeters, our model will be scaled 1,000 times. So that means if I will just zoom out over here, we're going to see how that will no longer be visible. What we need to do is, after load, the model imported will be selected. If not, you can select it over here. It will be highlighted in orange. And all we have to do is press S to enable the scale tool. And now I need to type in the value. So I can use the keyboard input. So I'll type in 0.001 and afterwards I will hit enter. And we're going to see that the model will be centered over here. If I'm going to press comma on the numpad, this will zoom into selected, which will be this one. Let me see if I can enable, so for this one I don't have the hotkeys for this version of Blender, but I will specify all the hotkeys that I'm using. Now we have the model over here loaded. This is the default cube from Blender, and if you are familiar with the overall size within Blender, you will know that this will be 2 meters. So I go over here for the measure, I enable snapping. That means I can hold down a point over there and a point over here. And we're going to see that the following dimension will be 2 meters over here. So that edge of the cube. Now I will delete the default cube because we don't gonna need that. I'm gonna select the Napoleon OBJ over here, and as we can see, this will be below the ground floor over here, so I can just press G for grab, Z for the axis, and I'm gonna move this upwards. Since I'm still having snapping enabled, we're gonna see how that will snap like this, so a little bit lower. I will disable snapping, and now I can use the views. For example, I can click over here, this will be numpad 1, and we're going to see this will take us to the perspective view. I can press G for grabbing, Z for the axis, and I will position it over here. And now we have this position onto the ground floor. It's still not that centered over here. We see an orange dot. That is the origin of the model. So we can go to Object, Set Origin. We can go and center the origin of the model either to the 3D cursor or to the geometry. If I'm going to go to the geometry, we're going to see that Blender will try to see the middle of the 3D scan. So we see it over here somewhere in the middle. And I can now move it over here. I could have moved it even without that center, but for more advanced parts, if you're going to add rotation and so on, that will control a lot of elements associated with this. Now, if I would want to move that center point right exactly in the middle, I can do that. I can go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D cursor, and now it's snapped over there. Okay, so we have the model loaded at the true scale. I'm going to enable the viewport shading over here so we can see the model. If I'm going to go back over here within the Sketchfab embedded model, we're going to see that the model looked different over here. So if I will make this full screen, what's actually happening is for this OBJ, Blender converted that material to a PBR material. So if I will go over here, we're going to see that we have a lot of glow on the model. So what we need to do is to select the model, go for the material, and we have the roughness parameter over here. And if I will increase this, let's say to 0.8, we're going to see that that shininess will no longer be visible now. So let's take a look at the workflow regarding this. How can we improve it? This is why I prefer to use Blender. Previously, I used to work with 3ds Max and Mudbox in this case, but I always had to send the model between those two softwares. Within Blender, I can just usually go, for example, to the sculpting environment. This will take me over here. The shading will not be visible by default, so again we need to activate that over here by clicking on that, or we can press Z and we can choose either between solid, rendered, wireframe, or material preview. Usually I recommend to use material preview when you are working on the model, because this will give you the most, let's say, visible viewport. And if I'm going to zoom out over here, zoom in towards the head of the bust over here, we're going to see that there are a lot of added noise geometry. We can also go back over here. We could have the possibility to do retopology over here, or we can use the dynamic retopology only to add over there. For this case study, I'm just going to use the default tools. So over here, I'm currently within the brush. I'm having the normal draw. So if I'm going to hold down Shift on the keyboard, this will allow me to smooth. And I will just drag the mouse. And we're going to see how that added geometry on the ear of the sculpture has been changed. Over here underneath this helmet, we see that there are again some added geometry, so we can smooth that out. Let's address over here the nose as well. And we see how that will be redefined. On this side, we have even a lot more added geometry. So let me just jump back over here and make that more visible. So we see it over here. 10 years ago, when they processed this within Artec, Blender didn't have the possibility to do this. So only a couple of softwares were good for this. We also see the overall texture quality of this is not that great. If you're going to go over here for the scanner, we're going to see that this will use a 1.3 megapixel texture resolution. But overall, those pixels will not have a lot of details, as we can see over here. And also, the overall wrapping is not that great. So we can also process those aspects. Currently, we're dealing with the geometry added sections over here by the scanner, that noise. So let's smooth this out as well. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and I will smooth that out. You can also use the other sculpting elements over here. For example, you can use elastic grabbing or the grab tool in order to further change the geometry. But in this case, I don't want to do that. But as you can see, you can easily do that if you want to change the mesh around. Over here again we have some added geometry that we can process the same. But let's jump and see the texture workflow over here. So I will jump to texture paint. We're going to have the model loaded over here. This will again have that specular view, so make sure to go to render to viewport shading, not to viewport shading over here, so the third one. And if I will zoom in over here, we're going to see how the geometry for the nose has been fixed. Over here as well for the ear, but over here we have a white area. So in order to cover that with texture, we can use the clone tool. This will work similar to Photoshop, you are familiar with that. That means I need to specify the point where I'm going to copy and clone the material. For example, over here, I will hold down Shift, do a right click. That will give me the selection. And now I can make the brush larger using this radius, or you can use the brackets on the keyboard. And you can just drag on top of that. And you see how that white area was covered. Over here for this, we still have the geometry that we should address first. Let me see if I'm going to find some other white areas. So over here on this color, let's just paint over that. Usually sections that will not have color are those inwards that were mostly reconstructed by the Artec processing software over here, Artec Studio, and those are surfaces that are inwards. Let me see. Yeah, for example, over here we see this underlying surface that will not have texture at all, so we can just clone that and we can fit it. This of course will not be the same as 3D scanning and obtaining the exact texture of that, but usually this is a good workflow. When you are painting surface like this, it's important to keep in mind that the texture will work mostly from the direction. You can also go over here within the brush settings, and you can change the direction that will be painted. So you can also adjust this. For example, if I will go to fall off texture or brush for the mode, we have different types. We can also go directly over here within view, and we can also do some settings so that always the front facing surfaces will be painted. So I will make a secondary video regarding that because the workflow over there is a little bit more complex. Now, this is how you can easily process. Over here we see that it's a little bit off in terms of texture. So if I'm going to try to paint over that, we're going to see that it will not work. So over here we should also maybe address some unwrapping in this case. But overall, for small details that have been UV unwrapped by the Artec scanner, as we can see it over here on the holes here, we can just turn around that and texture it. But in this case, I consider this to be added geometry, so I will go within the sculpting environment, so not modeling. This will take a little bit of time to pass between those workbenches since the model is quite large, but I will go again to sculpting. And I know that we have some added geometry over here, and that's visible. So I'll just hold down Shift. I will position the mouse so that I will be normal too, and I will move the mouse back and forth. And we're going to see how that smoothen out that added geometry, and now we are left with this section that we need to paint over. Okay, so we see how that texture was changed over there. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this kind of content. I highly encourage you to take a look at Blender since this is open source and also free, and you can really improve your 3D scans with this. So I will position a similar video over here on the left side. I will also add a subscribe button to the right. And if you consider that you enjoyed this kind of content, you can consider to support me. You will find the link at Buy Me a Coffee in the description. So that's it. Thanks for watching.